Hi, this is Marina from Dark Star Astrology, bringing you the lunar eclipse on February the 10th coming up. And this one falls in Leo Decan 3. And this is the first of two eclipses that fall in this decan this year. The second one in August is really important. That's the one that's going to be on Regulus, and it falls across most of America. And I just think that's going to be really... of course, it's also Donald Trump's ascendant as well. But this one may be a bit of a taster for it. So we have the influence of the constellation Ursa Minor, which is the little bear. But even so, with this one, there's still great leadership qualities that Regulus has. And this constellation, though small, still brings formidable command in times of war when life or death decisions need to be made quickly. The moon adds a nurturing touch, so there's also tough love with this, and those touched by this moon will have to risk short-term austerity measures for the sake of long-term prosperity. So just to give you the stats on this lunar eclipse, it's going to be at 22 degrees of Leo. And the major aspects that I'm going to look at really are the trine to Uranus, which is also conjunct Eris. There's the Uranus-Eris conjunction at the same time that's been ongoing really through last year and this year. And also it's sextile Jupiter, and the fixed star that it's on is called Percard, and it's in the right foot of the little bear. So the moon, or rather the lunar eclipse, which is also a full moon, does not sugarcoat for the sake of popularity in this decan. And it's kind of unusual really that in a sign that seems so ego-driven, the maternal energy of the bear is actually more about helping others than themselves. It really depends how evolved the soul is with this aspect, or in this case, it really depends on how evolved the collective are. With other harsh aspects, there can be a ruthless drive and tyrannical tendencies. So we're sort of seeing a parallel development with certain groups being tyrannical and other groups not being, I guess. But there is a ruthless drive as well. Maybe the ruthless drive, you're forced into being ruthless when you are up against a tyrant or a tyrannical group of people. So at this time, we might have to face traits caused by a difficult childhood, one where we had to fight to be ourselves. And of course, this eclipse can work to toughen the soul up too. And this toughness will take a while to build up, probably over the 3 months of the effect of this lunar eclipse. And by the end of it, people or whoever's touched by this eclipse should feel more belligerent. But despite all, even if decisions taken at this time rub people up the wrong way, they are still, or the people making those decisions are still admired for being courageous with their choices. As the head of a nation, company, or family, this eclipse enables trailblazers who will do whatever it takes to protect those little cubs in their care. At the mundane level, this is the great patriot who is willing to die for their country. Country equals descendants. And loyalty is the number one demand at this time. So woe betide traitors. Those who stoop to revenge at this time will suffer greatly, but they won't care who else they bring down with them. So keep a wide berth from the great sinking bear. It's just occurred to me already that I guess the banning, the so-called Muslim ban, which isn't a Muslim ban, it's a ban on 7 countries that were already on a list that had existing restrictions placed on them during Obama's administration. And these countries were Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. And these were labeled countries of concern. So it's not a Muslim ban per se, but they are obviously predominantly Muslim countries. Anyway, let's not get into the politics. But all I'm saying is that in effect, they are what we would say maybe traitors, not the people, not the civilians, but I guess at some point, the reason Obama put them on a list of countries of concern was that America was bombing them at some point, or interfering with regime change, whatever you want to call it. So, there was some kind of logic behind it, and nobody seemed to be upset when Obama did it. But anyway, whatever happens now, there's going to be, of course, there's going to be some kind of revenge for this. So, and, there's already people saying, well, this is going to create more terrorists. So why would that be? Why would that be if we don't have to fear these countries? You can't have it both ways. Anyway, the 3 fixed stars that are found around the eclipse degree, there are 3, and the first is Tania Australis, which is the red star in the paw of the Great Mother Bear again. Now, these stars in Ursa Major have a Mars quality, so here we go with the warlike aggression. This star is said to give a quiet, prudent, suspicious, mistrustful, self-controlled and patient nature. This is interesting. But then an uneasy spirit and great anger and revengefulness when roused. So it is like, don't poke the bear. I do tend to think that maybe Western countries have been quite controlled in their response to what's been going on in Europe. And maybe now the bear has been roused one too many times. There's been a lot. There's been a lot of terrorism over 2016. So, it's kind of nature, isn't it? Really. The next star is Ras Al-Azed Borealis. I don't know if that's pronounced right. But that's in the lion's head. And the Ebertons say that it can give rise to mental illness and depression, depending on how it's configured. Now, since this is an eclipse, there's always a wild card element to this energy anyway. And we've already seen so many celebrity meltdowns in the media, haven't we? So just expect more of those with celebrities who have 22 Leo somewhere in their charts prominent. Now, Noonan says that the lion's head stars are said to indicate those with an appreciation for language and a power of expression, but also those who may be heartless and cruel. So this star adds a mocking, satirical quality about it then. The brightest of the stars and closest to the eclipse degree is this Percard that I mentioned earlier, which is found in the Little Bear. And this constellation gives indifference and improvidence of spirit, which can lead to many troubles. So far, all of these stars are not exactly, I would say, very auspicious. They're definitely problematic. We can also bear in mind that even though these stars have got very rough edges, the ancient navigators did look upon them as guardians and guides since they were close to the poles. So there's a kind of rough diamond quality about all of these stars, really. My feeling, it's a kind of last resort situation where there's no one else to follow, so just got to go with it. And maybe it's not ideal, but nobody else is picking up the leadership role in a way, or nobody's picking up the protective role, because I think, for me, that's what I want a government to do. I don't want it to interfere in my life. You don't really want to see the police much, do you? Unless you really need them. You don't want them following you around and interfering in your daily life. But if you've got a burglar, or if you're under attack, you want the police. You do want that. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, if a government cannot protect its country from invasion or whatever, or harm to its citizens, it's not doing its job. And that's all it needs to do, really. And this eclipse with all these bare stars, it seems to be putting those protection concerns under the spotlight. Now, what's really interesting in this eclipse is the fact we have a mystic rectangle aspect pattern. And what it does is it's going to link the eclipse with the Jupiter opposite Uranus, which is happening at between 21 and 23 degrees on the Aries Libra axis. So just let's look at the aspects that make this mystic rectangle. So the first one is the moon trine Uranus, and that brings an abundance of radical and innovative energy to the public. Self-assured rebellion occurs from those who don't give a fig about conforming to the status quo. And the trine brings to fruition personal freedom, revolution, and electric genius. So at this eclipse, the more outlandish people behave, the more popular they become. Which is strange because from what I can see really on both sides, on the far left and the far right, people are just getting very extreme. And people seem to like it, whatever. The press aren't condemning any extreme left-wing violence, and the right-wingers don't seem to be too bothered by whatever Trump does and whatever they say about him. Even, Pussygate didn't really dent into his popularity at all. So it's as if both sides have now got their own media to listen to, and they're just going to believe that, really. At least there is an alternative now to the mainstream, which is, I guess, why this populist nationalist fervor, which has been so demonized for so long, is coming back. And it's coming back in a way, I think it's coming back on this sort of Uranus energy. I think Uranus is pushing it through because people are excited about it because it's been such a taboo area. And now Donald Trump, whatever you think about him, has made it okay to talk about immigration. And now we can actually have some sensible discussions about it and not hysterical, you're a Nazi if you're anything right of center. Now, the sun part of the eclipse creates brilliant visionary situations and the courage to break through conventions. I mean, that's what we're seeing, aren't we? The rebelliousness comes from having gone through a period of conformity and orthodoxy, which I would say is really political correctness. The stability of the past at least provided a stable anchor from which this Uranian ship can explore. So conversely, it is the very fact that we've had such a safe, stable background in the past that we feel secure enough to take great leaps into the Uranian unknown. And that's really what it boils down to, is that for us in the West, we have been pretty comfortable. There's been no wars. There's been no threat of danger from any area, really, but only this year, really, after the migrant crisis, because they're not refugees. Sorry, they're not. The definition of a refugee is that you are fleeing danger and you stay in the first country that you find refuge in. And a lot of these have been economic migrants. It's obvious. And then I don't understand, when they come all the way to America, I mean, when the hell has that happened? To get them to America, it's quite a long journey. Somebody must be flying them over or funding this. So it doesn't make sense at all. So Uranus is shaking things up because we've been so stagnant for so long and we've rested on our laurels and we've thought that everything's fine and dandy. And then the shock of all the terrorism that happened in Europe and the US as well over the last year has really shaken people up. Now, the moon is also sextile Jupiter, and this brings travel into it. The imagination is expansive and pioneering, inspired by overseas travel or inner travel. The eclipse energy will still support the routes, though, no matter how far afield we may voyage. Those touched by this moon should attract benefactors. And sometimes this comes as a reward from generously nurturing and supporting other artists in the past as well. So that's on the personal level. But just going back to the travel thing, it is really interesting that it is true. When we go traveling, we do want to sample the other culture, but we still, and this happens everywhere you go, if you find another person from your country, you stick with them. You do. It's just the way it goes. People congregate with people from their national family, if you like. And it happens when the same with migrants. They stick together for protection. It's just a normal animal instinct. And that is another reason why mass immigration all at once just doesn't work, because it creates ghettos, and we're seeing that now. Sun trine Jupiter in the mystic rectangle has strong beliefs. It will also probe people to do their duty and support those who they deem worthy enough or not, as the case may be. There's a strong sense of justice and a look at how fair some laws are. Reforms in the law could be made at this time. And I guess that's already been, it's already happening, isn't it, with the travel restrictions. Sun trine Jupiter gives the foresight to spot talent and potential in apprentices, and agents are on the lookout for fresh blood at this time in terms of artists, musicians and creators. I did notice as well another reform of the law, that it appears that Trump is withdrawing support for certain arts, and I just thought that was kind of interesting, because as I used to be an artist, obviously, and I just remember whenever I heard about governments reducing funding for the arts, that it was such an awful thing. But now I know what sort of bloody things they were funding. It was art that would never make money on its own. It was really, maybe this is a stupid example, and I don't know whether it was government funded, but there was there was an exhibition where they dipped a crucifix of Christ in urine. What? And that was supposed to be art. Oh my God. So, is it fair that Christian taxpayers are paying to see their God put in a bucket of piss? Really? If it was done to any other religion, we know what the consequences would be about that, don't we? So I won't mention which one, but I think we all know. You can't even do a cartoon. Anyway, so that's interesting. That withdrawing funding for so-called art, I don't know. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think if art really is something that people want to buy, they will buy it. I would buy a gorgeous painting of water lilies, or a lovely sculpture by Rodin. This pissing shit. Sorry, no, who's going to buy that? Anyway, you know what I feel about modern art, because I've done videos on that. Now, we also have the big aspect being triggered, because it's part of this mystic rectangle, and it's the Jupiter opposite Uranus. Now, this can be very inventive. So I think we might get a revival of some decent art. Please, God in heaven. It will create exciting new utopias and visions for the future that can inspire others to follow the path to illumination and not poo. Uranus is the great enlightener, so it can be a Kundalini awakening. Also, since with Jupiter, sexuality and sex merge, and Jupiter and Uranus also both share thunderbolts in common. So I think this is an exciting renaissance of something lovely. So let's look at this mystical rectangle. So we did have it back in on the full moon of Gemini, and that I likened to opening a Christmas present, and I called it unveiling, and pondered whether the packaging was more glamorous than the actual content. tense. And again, I guess I'm referring to the Trump presidency too, because, he made so many promises, but it just seems like he is actually, he's right on the case, isn't he? And he's doing everything he promised his voters. And it's no good people moaning about it. This is what he campaigned for, and he's doing it. This is democracy. And even if people say, okay, he didn't win the popular vote. Oh, come on. We know that the popular vote is not how democracies run. The founding fathers created the Electoral College for that very reason, that you can't buy in voters, and the Democrats are notorious for doing that. Same with the Labour Party in England as well. That's why we have our constituencies. And I know this might not sound fair, but if you think of it in the world, like say, each country has its own culture. It's got its own interests. And if you had a world government, you'd have China, India, Africa, all the very high density population places, or high population places, dictating the world. I don't know. I don't think that's fair, to be honest, but others may think different. So basically the meaning of the mystic rectangle, according to the Hubers, they call it something else. They call it a righteousness rectangle, which is kind of appropriate really with all the Jupiter energy, judgmental Jupiter. But they say that the internal pressure caused by the oppositions could lead to a breakdown. If the internal tension is not diffused, substance is lost. Sometimes the bottled up pressure leads to mental confusion, and there is a conversion, a transformation from Saul to Paul. That leads to a wholesale abandonment of what was important before, thus enabling a spiritual rebirth. And before Christmas, there was a lot of tension waiting to be released, and people were sitting on the Gemini fence, because it was a Gemini moon, flip-flopping from left to right, not knowing if Trump would even make it to the inauguration. But I think the end of the year, it does have that kind of doom-laden end times vibe to it. So I think with this rectangle, it is different. And it actually has Saturn crowning it, and it does look like the apex of a roof. And I think this eclipse could be more hopeful. So on to my summary. Now, in order for real change to take place in society, there has to be a concerted effort to organise and get one's message across in a non-violent fashion. The lunar eclipse activation of one of the most positive aspects of the year is something to be excited about. It looks like truth and integrity will shine through. Now, Uranus is the new technology which we can use as a way to awaken ourselves and others. The cyber world is a double-edged sword, and we must always remember to unplug ourselves so that we do get a good dose of earthing energy as well. And with this eclipse, we will see the good side of technology and how we can use it to unchain ourselves from slavery. Now, knowledge is power, but unfortunately, state-sponsored education works to dumb down the younger generations. These days, they are also crippled by debt as soon as they enter their adult lives. And of course, debt is slavery. So in effect, they are enslaved as soon as they leave college, whereas their uneducated, so-called uneducated grandparents left school, went to work and could afford to start a family straight away. They matured very early due to having responsibilities in life. And Jupiter is about higher learning. So at this eclipse, we look at what ways we can educate ourselves so we can make better life choices and be truly free and sovereign human beings. Now, another point about slavery is that it's also about being a sex slave. Young people are being groomed into sex slavery through internet porn. As mentioned, Jupiter opposite Uranus can symbolize the Kundalini, and the internet can be a great awakener, but there are so many rabbit holes you can fall into. It is only a very small percentage of people who follow the priestess snake of wisdom, while others get vectored into the prostitute snake of the lower chakras. However, just a small percent is all it takes to move the masses, as long as the critical mass is reached. Looking back at the mystic rectangle, Saturn makes a minor grand trine with Sun and Jupiter, and this may be where the trickle-down effect starts from. Saturn is actually pretty close to the galactic center at 26 degrees Sagittarius, so maybe there's just something in the stardust. And I'd love to believe that we are moving through an area of space that has got some special quality about it, that there's something in the air, there's something in the space dust that is activating and awakening. I would love to believe that, but I'm pretty skeptical of all these things, even though I'm an astrologer. But I do feel like something's happening, and it may just be a case that it's, again, like when the printing press gave people books and direct access to the Bible, actually, as well, which started the whole of the Reformation. The internet is probably the same thing, because it does give people access to different viewpoints, and I'm so grateful that there's RT. And I know everyone will say, oh, it's a Russian sponsored news outlet, but all the ones in America are American sponsored. And don't think, we know that there's every government wants to present itself in the best possible light. So at least now we can just see other viewpoints. I think there's always going to be a slant. There's always going to be, I'm biased too, but I'd like to think, because I have been on the left pretty much from the day I could vote when I was 18. So how many years is that? It's a long time. And so I think I'm now balancing it out by viewpoints from the right. And hopefully I've got some kind of balance in between. I try to be fair. I think this is why the internet is so important, because it is truly independent, and I've had my eyes opened. I really, really have. So sorry to go on about this at the very end, but just if there's any new people who are thinking, what the hell? Because I'm an astrologer, and also, of course, the new agey side of things is also heavily lefty, because left-wing politics, we're all equal, is actually very Neptunian, and by its very nature, people who are carers and healers tend to be compassionate, and they want to help everyone. But as I've learned, to help someone to the point where they do not develop strong leg muscles, they can't heal because they're using you as a crutch. That enables them to stay in victim mode. And that's something that you only learn when you are almost killing with kindness, or suffocating, smothering as well. That's another thing, smothering with love. So there's that, and also the whole journey of the Persephone myth that I've been very focused on this year. Well, actually not this year, for the last 3 years really. And that's also led me to believe that you can be groomed to drop down your barriers, basically, and let everyone in. And just to give you an example, I know this is probably a very loaded example, but it's like, do you have sex with a guy because you feel sorry for him? At some point you have to say no to people, and their rejection, they're rejected, they feel like they feel spurned, they get angry with you. It's just the same for a nation. Why would it be any different? And you have to be discerning. And if you just sleep with anybody because you don't care, because you have no self-respect, because you feel sorry for people, and well, he bought me dinner, so I had to sleep with him. It's prostitution, and it's lowering your immunity, and that's when disease happens. So it's all the same. It's all the same in the macrocosm, the microcosm. It's very interesting that at the same time as all this migration issues, borders, whether you let people in or not, at the same time, there's been the Pizzagate, the paedophile stuff, the grooming of children is the same as the grooming of nations. No, you've got to welcome everyone. Otherwise, you're mean and nasty and unsympathetic. And that's gaslighting. It's gaslighting nations, and it's the same for a young girl as well. And there's a certain naivety about, especially women, because they play on the women thing, like, all these poor little children, how could you be so heartless to turn them away? And then you see boats of just fighting age men. It's cruel. It's cruel to them, and it's cruel to us. So that's why I get so worked up about it, because it's on par with psychological grooming and raping of a country, and it's actually happened. It happened last New Year's Eve in Cologne. So these themes are being mirrored everywhere, and it is quite ironic as well that nobody really seems to make the connection between the women's marches were going on about pussy grabs back. I don't know if I want to go down the. I'm not going to defend Trump about the pussy comment, but there is a difference. You see, people don't seem to make the difference between words and context. And 11 years ago, with what happened, what physically happened a year ago by a group of people who did grab pussies in Cologne. Let's go back to that again. I don't understand why people are getting up in arms, or women are getting up in arms about locker talk compared to actual physical sexual abuse. Okay, sorry, I have gone off on a bit of a tangent, but it really was referring back to the Jupiter aspect of this mystic rectangle, and the fact that both Uranus and Jupiter are to do with the Kundalini, and how that energy is so precious that it can be a great awakener, but it's often siphoned away and wasted on just immediate sexual gratification, instant orgasm, that's it, bang, bang, quick. So, yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother subject. But the point is long-term thinking, and the EU, from our point of view in Europe, have handled the migration problem or refugee problem, because there are refugees, there are migrants, economic. It's been hard to tell the difference, but they've managed it abysmally. Because apparently, for every one person or one migrant, refugee, whatever, comes to Europe, you could help, I think it's something like 150 in their own environment, which people at the end of the day, they don't really want to leave their home and all their relatives. Anyway, I can't find the exact figures, but I do know that it's a lot cheaper to help them in their own countries. And that means you can help more people. So it does not make sense. And none of this has been handled really well. And of course, none of it will be happening if Western countries or Western governments, Western elites, not the common people. We don't want to have wars. We have no interest in bombing civilians in the Middle East. But if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. So, obviously the West has responsibility. The Western governments have responsibility, but they cannot, it's not fair to put that guilt and responsibility on the common people, on working class people who are struggling anyway. It's not fair to put that on them. And that's why there has been a backlash from the working classes, because they're the ones who are suffering. And I've said this so many times, I won't keep going on about it. But anyway, we know. So I'm hoping this mystic rectangle and these eclipses will bring about a sensible approach and a less emotive approach to the problems of the world, because solving things by knee-jerk reaction and emotional blackmail and conditioning is not the right way to solve problems. And unfortunately, nurturing types, mother bears, our gut reaction is to look after the cubs. And women have been especially abused, mentally abused, as far as I'm concerned, into doing things against their interest and manipulated by the media on their natural nurturing reactions to save those who are unfortunate and in poverty and who are dying. It's a natural gut reaction. But nobody's explaining the long-term risks of doing that. And I've likened it before to a lifeboat cannot take everybody off the sinking ship. You can't. And somebody has to stand there and make that heartbreaking decision of saying no to that last person. Sorry, because you'll sink the whole load of us. You'll sink all of us if we let you on. Now, whether you like it or not, men are better at making these decisions in an emergency. They can separate their heart from their head, because this is just something that's biological, and they will be the ones that say, look, sorry, no. And then everyone will say to the men, oh, you're so heartless and cruel and you have no empathy. But sometimes these decisions have to be made. And they're not nice ones, and you'll get yelled at for them and you'll be demonized for them. But in the end, that's life, and nature is cruel sometimes. All right, I'm going to bring it to an end now. All the best. Enjoy the stardust. Bye-bye.